My name is Ramona Ortega. I am the CEO and founder of My Money, My Future, and we are hosting Money Matters, a virtual financial summit. Today, we're going to be discussing financial aid and how to navigate it, and we are super excited to have a special guest with us. We have Jolene Money, who's an advisor with the Office of Financial Aid. We want everyone to get to know her and her office. So we're going to include her contact information below. Jolene, take it away. Why don't you start with the FAFSA, because that is sort of where all things financial aid start.
Yes, the FAFSA is very important. It's the beginning of your financial aid journey. So as of October 1st is the opening date for the FAFSA, which is important to know because October 1st is the opening date for the next academic year. And that doesn't mean that if you're in a current academic year, you already missed that deadline. They have it open till June 30th. So you have that time to turn in a FAFSA for a current academic year. But understanding the first steps is important as we need, and usually any financial aid office to determine aid needs a FAFSA. And the first step would be such completing your FSA ID, which would be your electronic signature to proceed into the FAFSA portal.
It's also important for students to know that this is something that they're going to have to do with their parents most of the time, if they're not a dependent, if they're not independent, that is. And so it's really important to sit down with your parents and remind them, hey, we need to fill out this FAFSA, I'm graduating, or even in the next year, starting in October, to gather those documents like your tax documents. I think a lot of people forget that there's a lot of information that you need to provide to the government because they're assessing your financial stability and your financial health to award you essentially money for a loan. So it's just like any lending process, whether you buy a car or you buy a house, you are going through sort of a vetting process, and it starts with the FAFSA. If you are a dependent, you most likely are not filing your own taxes unless you make generally over $12,000. So it's going to go parents' sort of taxes. And so half of it is just gathering the documents. So Jolene, someone fills out the FAFSA, they have their ID. I think you mentioned this before that you'll need to have a social security number. What about students who maybe are DACA students or their parents don't have a social security? What happens then?
So it's important to know that if the student does not have a social security number, they usually can reach out to their financial aid office and complete a paper FAFSA. This would help the financial aid office calculate need for determining other types of aid, such as scholarships. Now, the FAFSA, if the student has a social security number, then they are eligible to complete the FAFSA, and they very well should. If their parents
So I filled out the FAFSA, now I'm ready to go, and the government says we can give you some loans, some grants, perhaps some work study. So let's cover all three of those. Let's start with loans. What kind of loans do you get from the federal government?
So upon the completion of the FAFSA, students sometimes forget that the federal government will let them know what their estimated award will be or offer. So at the end of the FAFSA, it actually gives them a breakdown of what they could anticipate for receiving for grants, work study, and loans. So for example, one of the loans that would be offered is a subsidized loan. This loan is based off of your family need. So upon the end of the FAFSA, they will give you a number. It's called an expected family contribution, EFC. This is a very important number, as that number drives what the federal government feels is your need for assistance. This also plays a part in the grants and the subsidized loan and will determine whether or not a subsidized loan is offered to you. And the subsidized loan is very popular because it is the zero interest bearing loan that the federal government offers. And that's important to know that if you're offered the subsidized, it's something that you should take advantage of if you feel that loans is something that you will need.
Right, and a subsidized loan, as you said, is a zero interest during school?
Now, it is zero interest while you're in school. So while you're attending, it will be at a zero interest. So the government's essentially paying that interest for you. And it's a great opportunity to use money. And if you can, create some type of payback system while you're in school. So when it comes time to repay that loan, you've already built some type of structure to repay that loan that was given to you without any interest.
That's right. And so subsidized is good because it's essentially free money while you're in school because you're getting the federal government to sort of essentially waive that interest. Now the interest will start accruing once you graduate. For an unsubsidized loan, which by the way, a lot of students will get both, right, in the course of their 4 years. But if you do get an unsubsidized loan, that interest is accruing while you're in school. And that's really important because this undermines sort of how your loans end up becoming really big. It's that compound interest. So every month it's adding interest to your loan while you're in school. So if you have the opportunity to pay some of that down while you're in school, that's probably a good idea. So going on to the Pell Grants, grants obviously are free money. You don't have to pay it back, so it's not a loan. What are the kinds of grants that are available to students?
So student grants that are available, the most common is the Pell Grant. And this is probably the more larger and more anticipated grant that students wait for upon the completion of their FAFSA. Now, the Pell Grant is not expected to be paid back. There are other types of grants, such as a federal grant and state grants, that are driven by that expected family contribution. So grants are not money expected payback, but again, it's financial aid. And certain criteria, such as completing your classes, meeting a GPA, all those would be expressed in the terms and conditions that is given to you as a student as a recipient of federal assistance. And it's just informing you of the thresholds and the guidelines that the federal government wants you to uphold while receiving that aid.
That's important to remember, students, that there are, like anything, rules attached to this kind of money, right? And so I just want to underline things like your credits, making sure that you're taking enough credits so that it doesn't trigger some kind of a repayment clause. Because if you fall below, for example, half time, or perhaps you dropped a class, there's a lots of sort of fine print that has to do with your obligations to receive that money. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. You don't want to get caught in a situation where you're being asked to repay some of that money because you didn't meet the qualifications. The next thing that we're going to talk about is work study, because that's an offer of a job on campus that is essentially being paid through your federal aid. So explain to us a little bit about what that is and how it works.
So work study is money that is allocated based on your need again. And it is a question that is on the FAFSA. It asks if you are interested in work study. We always encourage our students to select yes if that's something they may want to partake in and later in the year. So upon agreeing to saying you would like work study, then that would be determined on if you were offered work study. Now, to utilize work study, you would need to apply for a position within the university and go through the proper channels, such as human resources and or our career services department, to find a job that takes work study and that would utilize your work study in the offer that you were sent.
Great. And just to be clear, work study is not a loan. Is it free money? Is it just the fact that you'll be working and receiving some of that money directly in a paycheck, and the idea is that you'd be applying that to your cost of school?
So work study is not a grant and it's not a loan. It is actually, the government will send money for you to work and it will be in the form of your paycheck. So as you work, the money that was awarded or offered to you in work study will be sent to you in the form of your wages.
Thank you so much for that clarification. We really encourage people to utilize as much work study as possible because it's going to reduce your overall debt. again, part of all managing all of this is that as new students, you're taking on one of the biggest financial responsibilities in your life, especially with the amounts that college is costing so many people these days. If you're out of state, for example, you're paying a premium. And so to reduce your overall debt when you come out of school, we want to take advantage of everything that is offered. So one more thing that is important for people to understand are scholarships, because that's another form of essentially money you don't have to pay back. And I think there's a lot of confusion about, so where do I find a scholarship? And does the financial aid office do that for me? So why don't you walk us through scholarships and how to access them, and this responsibility of the students to apply for those kinds of opportunities.
Well, we are the Office of Financial Aid and Scholarships. So although we do handle scholarships, most of the time our responsibility is reporting information to scholarship entities. We also have several types of in-house scholarships, such as our deans, our presidential. Those scholarships are awarded based on your merit as you became a student at New Mexico Highlands. And you're usually notified if you've been awarded one of these scholarships. And if you have not been awarded one of these merit-based indoor, in-home scholarships, there are other types of scholarships you could take advantage of, such as our foundation scholarships, which are monies that have been set aside for our New Mexico Highlands and our students here by our mostly our alumni. It's a great opportunity. It's one application and it comes through hundreds of scholarships, and it lets you know which ones are applicable to you, and it automatically, signs you up for those scholarships that are applicable to you, or tells you what additional action may be needed. Now, these are scholarships we can control and we can see within Highlands. Now, there are a lot of external scholarships that exist. We do help facilitate by giving information to those scholarship entities on what your need may be, what a lot of them would like to know if you're meeting criteria that they have set forth to receive scholarships. So that's important. Those outside scholarships are actually scholarships that students may have gotten because of affiliations, or something that they have an affiliation with or organization. And these are mostly scholarships that students have to research and find on their own based on criteria that fits them.
Great. And that's really important. And we are going to share some digital tools and platforms that help you find scholarships. There's quite a few out there. Again, like Jolene said, those are third parties, so they're not affiliated with the university. But there's a database essentially that will help you sift through the kind of scholarships that you're eligible for. And I just want to underline that there's so much money that sort of sits on the table for students in terms of scholarship money, and that you have to just be creative. There's so many ways you can access scholarships. Perhaps if your parents worked at a company that provides a scholarship, you lived in a certain state, you're part of a certain organization, you play sport that they're interested in. There's lots of little niches for scholarships that we want to make sure people have access to. So we will include those resources. Jolene, we want to end by really understanding what are the obligations, particularly for student loans, as students either exit college or perhaps they go into a part-time situation. Just walk us through some of those options and the timeline that people are needing to prepare for as they exit school.
So if you're preparing to graduate, exit school, you need to realize if you've utilized student loans, this is something that's going to need your attention. So if you graduate, congratulations. Now you're given a 6-month grace period before the government expects for you to make arrangements for how you will be repaying the student loans that you utilized during your education course. Now, if you drop below half-time, and although you have not graduated, but you are no longer attending at a half-time status, the government is notified of this, and they do expect for you to start making arrangements on how to pay for the existing loans that are under your name. So this information is important because falling below halftime, maybe you decided to take a break. Well, now you have to decide whether that break is worth having to repay your student loans because it will be required of you. Or if you graduate, understanding you have to log on. Studentaid.gov has some great tools for you to utilize to understand what are you looking at for projected payments. Upon your completion, you are sent a notification that exit counseling is required. Exit counseling gives a lot of the same information that I just mentioned, but really helps you understand what will be the next course of action. Understanding that this is now something, an obligation between you and the federal government. Your local financial aid office is no longer part of making those payments or arranging for payment arrangements, as we're facilitators of having you utilize those loans and sending information to the government. But now that you are no longer a student, it is your responsibility to stay in contact with your lender that they have assigned you.
That's right. And we will be providing some information on understanding the different entities that you're going to have to interact with, because oftentimes your loan will be serviced by a different entity and people get confused, sort of, who is this person that's asking me for this payment? So we will talk a little bit about that. I also want to note that if you have taken out a Parent Plus loan, for example, that remember that your parents have co-signed essentially for your loan, and that if you don't pay that back and it goes into default, that means when you stop paying your loans, they could go after your parents. So this is a big obligation and responsibility, and we want to make sure that you're aware of those sort of processes and the obligations that you have as a student, but also that it's if you have taken that Parent Plus loan, it also means that your parents are involved. They've taken that responsibility as well. Anything that you want to share with us and with the students about what they need to know during the year for their financial aid?
So the main thing is understanding that your Office of Financial Aid and Scholarships is essentially a vessel. We receive the information that you enter on the FAFSA, which is a federal portal, a federal site. We import that information to calculate your need. So listing us down as your preferred school is obviously advised, because we are unable to obtain this information unless we are listed. And once we receive your file, then we will be in contact and send correspondence with you, letting you know any additional action needs to be taken on your part. Once we're able to decide what your aid will be, we send out a financial aid offer, and that will be posted to our internal self-service banner, which is important to get familiar with because it has a financial aid tab. That financial aid tab will tell you what awards have been offered to you in the forms of grants, work study, scholarships, and loans. And it's important to know this because even though something is in an offered status, doesn't mean you will receive it. It means that an additional action needs to be taken. So for example, if you see a student loan in an offered status, that probably means that we have not been contacted, that you would like to utilize that student loan. And that's very important, as we usually ask for a loan request form, because we want you, the student, to be aware of what action you're taking. We want you to know that it's a loan you're taking. What type of loan are you taking? And on that loan request form will be additional actions such as an entrance counseling and a master promissory note that needs to be completed upon us to award those funds to you. And having that information is important. Terms and conditions is another form. These are just an outline of your obligation as a student on what happens when you decide to utilize student aid. And as a student, what are they requiring of you?
That's right. I think it's really important that people understand the master promissory note. Like I mentioned before, remember, this is essentially a loan like any other loan. It's a contract between two parties, you as the student and then the lender. In this scenario, generally the lender is the federal government, but they still have a required contract around the agreement. And that's the master promissory note that you will essentially sign in your FAFSA portal. And that's what Julian is talking about, that they then receive that information and it's an acceptance of that loan. Thinking about the long term and how much money you should take and what kinds of jobs you should be looking for as you think about how are you going to pay back your loans.
Yes, and I always encourage our students to log on to studentaid.gov, as they have some great calculators for you to be able to utilize. If you know that you will be taking a loan, but you're wondering how much, understanding your cost of attendance, how much is being charged, how much do you really need versus how much you would want. And placing this information in the calculators is important, as those calculators will break down what your anticipated payment would look like if you stayed on that course. So if you borrowed X amount 1 year and do it 4 times for your duration while in school, it'll break down what your anticipated payment will be. This gives you a good idea. Will this be a feasible payment I can make upon my graduation? And remember, it's only a 6-month grace period. So for example, if you didn't get that job that you thought would pay so much in the first shot, then that's important to know, because can you still manage that monthly payment that's going to come through, that is going to be required of you? Yes, they have various types of repayment options, but some of them come with certain criteria that you may not be able to fit into at that moment. So it is important to take all those into consideration when anticipating taking a loan and understanding a need versus a want. Is this something I need to help pay for my balance, pay for my books, or is this a want because I want extra money? And it is important because those loans will come back. They are an obligation, and understanding how you're going to pay it back is essential to making sure your financial wellness.
And remember that your student loans are going to live with you for a very long time. So they are going to be reporting to your credit, and we're going to go over that in the next session. So people will start to realize like how important it's not just, you know, right now while I'm in school, but really what happens afterwards, and how to build that financial foundation when you do have student debt, and how to make sure it's manageable and not feeling overwhelmed as soon as you get out of school. I just want to say thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to be working with Highlands on this financial summit, and we think it's really important for our students to get all the information that they can to make the right decisions around financial aid.
Thank you, and we're excited, and we love to hear from our students. So please, if you have questions, don't ever hesitate to contact your financial aid office, as we have several advisors who are waiting to advise on courses of action, things that are needed, or general inquiries. I know sometimes people's financials could be a sensitive issue, and chances are we've heard or seen the same scenario. So please reach out to us. We love to hear from our students. And by all means, we are also available for the completion of the FAFSA. And we are always ready to assist and explain why they may be asking for the criteria that they're asking during the FAFSA completion. Thanks, Ramona.
Great, and we'll have those resources and links and emails, contact information available to you. Thank you.